James Arness broke his silence before his death in 2011, and what he revealed will destroy everything you thought you knew about Gunsmoke. For 20 years, Marshal Matt Dillon became the most iconic lawman in television history, but behind the heroic image there were brutal fights and devastating betrayals and secrets that CBS buried for decades. James spoke candidly in his final years, and what he admitted is shocking. The real reason he tried to quit after season 12. How the network forced him to fire his best friend from the show. The co-star affair that nearly destroyed the entire production. Why he called playing Matt Dillon the biggest mistake of his life. And the dark truth about what those 20 years really cost him. This is not another celebration of classic westerns. These are confessions from James Arness himself, exposing the ugly reality behind America's longest-running western. If you think you know the story of Gunsmoke, you are about to discover you were completely wrong. Let us dive into what James finally admitted when he had nothing left to hide. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. James Arness never wanted to play Matt Dillon. In 1955, he was a struggling film actor trying to break into leading man roles. He had appeared in science fiction movies and war films, but nothing stuck. Then CBS approached him about starring in a new Western series based on a popular radio show. James read the script and said no immediately. He told his agent that doing television was career. In the 1950s, film actors looked down on television as cheap and beneath them. James had dreams of becoming a movie star like his friend John Wayne. He thought if he did television, he would be stuck there forever and Hollywood would never take him seriously. But James was broke and desperate. His first marriage was falling apart and he had bills to pay. His agent convinced him to at least meet with the producers. James agreed, but he had already decided he would turn down any offer they made. What happened in that meeting changed everything, but not in the way James expected. The producers told James they were creating something different from other westerns. Matt Dillon would not be a typical hero who solved everything with his gun. He would be a lonely man burdened by the violence of his job. James was intrigued but still skeptical. Then John Wayne called him personally. Wayne had been asked to play Matt Dillon but turned it down because he did not want to do television. Wayne told James this was a great opportunity and he should take it. James trusted Wayne completely, so he said yes. But James admitted years later that he regretted that decision almost immediately. The first season of Gunsmoke was brutal. They filmed episodes back-to-back with almost no breaks. James would work 14-hour days 6 days a week. The physical demands were enormous. James did most of his own stunts, including fistfights and horse chases. He was constantly bruised and exhausted. James said he felt like he was in prison. He had signed a contract that locked him in for years, and there was no escape. What fans never figured out is that James Arness hated playing Matt Dillon for most of the show's run. The character was stoic and emotionally distant. Matt rarely smiled and never showed vulnerability. James said playing that character for 20 years was like living in a straitjacket. He could not express real emotions or bring any of himself to the role. Matt Dillon was an icon, but he was not a real person. James revealed that he begged the writers to give Matt more depth and complexity. He wanted Matt to fall in love or show fear or make mistakes, but the producers refused. They said audiences wanted Matt to be the strong, silent type, and changing that would ruin the show. James felt trapped playing a one-dimensional character week after week, year after year. He said it was soul-crushing work that made him feel like a robot going through the motions. The relationship between James Arness and Dennis Weaver, who played Chester, was one of the most complicated in television history. On screen, Matt and Chester were partners and friends. Off-screen, James and Dennis could barely tolerate each other. James revealed in his final interviews that Dennis was jealous and competitive from the very beginning. Dennis was a trained method actor who took his work very seriously. He thought James was just a big guy who got lucky. Dennis would criticize James' performance and suggest different ways to play scenes. James said Dennis treated him like an amateur who needed guidance. That condescension infuriated James. He was the star of the show and Dennis was the sidekick. But Dennis acted like he was the real talent carrying James on his back. The tension exploded during season 3. Dennis went to the producers and complained that Chester was being underused. He demanded more storylines and more screen time. The producers agreed and started writing episodes focused on Chester. James was furious. He felt like Dennis was trying to take over his show. James confronted Dennis and told him to stay in his lane. Dennis responded by saying that Chester was more interesting than Matt, and audiences agreed. The argument became so heated that they had to be separated. From that point on, James and Dennis maintained a professional relationship, but there was no warmth between them. They would film their scenes and then avoid each other completely. James admitted he was relieved when Dennis left the show in 1964. Dennis claimed he left to pursue a film career, but James revealed the real reason. The producers told Dennis they were reducing his role because James had demanded it. Dennis was given a choice to accept less screen time or leave. Dennis chose to leave, and he blamed James for destroying his opportunity. James said he did not regret forcing Dennis out. He believed Dennis was toxic and the show was better. Without him, one of the most shocking secrets James Arness revealed involves his relationship with Amanda Blake, who played Miss Kitty. For years, fans speculated that James and Amanda were having an affair in real life. The chemistry between Matt and Kitty was undeniable, and their unspoken romance was one of the show's defining elements. James finally admitted the truth, and it is more complicated than anyone imagined. James and Amanda did have an affair, but it was brief, and it nearly destroyed both of their lives. The affair started during season 2. James was going through a divorce from his first wife, and he was lonely and vulnerable. Amanda was beautiful and confident, and she made James feel alive in a way he had not felt in years. They tried to keep the affair secret, but people on set figured it out quickly. The problem was that Amanda was married. Her husband found out about the affair and threatened to go public. CBS executives panicked. If the scandal broke, it would destroy the show's wholesome image and cost the network millions. The network forced James and Amanda to end the affair immediately. They were told if they did not comply, they would both be fired. James and Amanda agreed, but the damage was done. Amanda's marriage fell apart, and she blamed James for ruining her life. James said the guilt ate away at him for years. He had betrayed Amanda's husband and jeopardized the show that hundreds of people depended on for their livelihoods. What made it worse was that James and Amanda had to continue playing romantic tension on screen while barely speaking off screen. James said some of their most acclaimed scenes together were filmed during periods when they genuinely resented each other. The longing looks and unspoken emotions were real, but they came from pain, not love. James admitted he cared deeply for Amanda, but their relationship was doomed from the start. They were wrong for each other, and the affair was a mistake, driven by loneliness, not genuine connection. James Arness also revealed the devastating physical toll that 20 years of Gunsmoke took on his body. James was 6'7" and he had been injured during World War II. He had limited mobility in one leg from a combat wound, but the show required constant physical action. James spent 20 years climbing on and off horses and getting into fistfights and doing stunts that his body could not handle. By season 10, James was in chronic pain. His back ached constantly, and his injured leg would swell up after long days of filming. James said he relied on painkillers and alcohol to get through. He would take pills before filming action scenes and then drink at night to numb the pain. James knew he was developing a dependency, but he did not know what else to do. The show had to go on, and he could not admit weakness. The producers were aware of James' physical problems, but they did not care. They kept writing scripts that required James to do dangerous stunts. There was one incident during season 15 that James said nearly killed him. He was filming a scene where Matt had to jump off a moving wagon. James told the director he did not think he could do it safely. The director pressured him and said they did not have time to bring in a stunt double. James attempted the jump and landed wrong. He felt something tear in his back and collapsed in agony. James was taken to the hospital and told he had herniated a disc. The doctor said he needed surgery and months of recovery, but CBS refused to shut down production. They told James he had to keep working. James was given cortisone injections and stronger painkillers and sent back to set. James said filming the rest of that season was torture. Every movement sent pain shooting through his body, but he smiled and played the hero because that was his job. One of the most painful revelations James made was about his family and how Gunsmoke destroyed his personal life. James was married twice, and both marriages failed largely because of the show. His first wife, Virginia Chapman, could not handle being married to a television star. She felt like she was competing with Matt Dillon for James' attention. James admitted he was never home. He worked constantly, and when he was home, he was too exhausted to be a present husband or father. James had 3 children, and he said he was a terrible father to all of them. His daughter Jenny struggled with addiction and died of a drug overdose in 1975. James said he blamed himself for her death. He had been too consumed with work to see that his daughter was suffering. He was too focused on being Matt Dillon to be a real father. That guilt haunted James for the rest of his life. James' second marriage to Janet Surtees was happier, but it also suffered because of the show. James said, even after Gunsmoke ended, he could not escape Matt Dillon. Everywhere he went, people expected him to be the strong, silent marshal. They did not want to see James Arness the flawed human being. James said he felt like he was living a double life. There was the public James who had to maintain the Matt Dillon image, and there was the private James who was broken and filled with regret. Janet tried to help him, but James said he pushed her away. He did not know how to let people in because he had spent 20 years playing a character who kept everyone at a distance. James Arness also revealed the financial reality of Gunsmoke and how it created resentment that lasted decades. James was the star, so he made more money than the rest of the cast. But James admitted he was still underpaid compared to what the show earned for CBS. Gunsmoke was one of the most profitable shows in television history. It ran for 20 years and then continued making money through syndication for decades. CBS made hundreds of millions of dollars from Gunsmoke, but James received a fraction of that. James tried to renegotiate his contract multiple times, but CBS refused to give him profit sharing. They told him he was already well paid and he should be grateful. James said that attitude made him feel exploited. He had given CBS 20 years of his life and destroyed his body and his family in the process. The least they could do was share the profits fairly. What made it worse was watching newer television stars negotiate better deals. James said he paved the way for hour-long dramas, but he did not benefit from the changes he helped create. Younger actors were getting ownership stakes and back-end deals that James never received. James admitted he was bitter about that. He felt like he had been used and discarded. When Gunsmoke finally ended in 1975, CBS did not even give James a proper goodbye. The network cancelled the show abruptly without warning. James found out Gunsmoke was ending by reading about it in the newspaper. He had spent 20 years as the face of CBS, and they could not even give him the courtesy of a phone call. One of the most disturbing things James revealed was how Gunsmoke portrayed violence and justice in ways that bothered him deeply. Matt Dillon solved most problems by shooting people or beating them up. James said that simplistic approach to law enforcement troubled him. The show suggested that violence was the answer, and that a strong man with a gun could fix everything. James knew that was not true. Real justice was complicated and messy, but Gunsmoke reduced everything to black and white. The bad guys were evil and deserved to die. The good guys were righteous and their violence was justified. James said he tried to bring more nuance to Matt Dillon, but the writers were not interested. They wanted clear heroes and villains, because that was what audiences expected. James also revealed that Gunsmoke romanticized the Old West in ways that ignored the real history. The show portrayed Dodge City as a place where honor and courage mattered. But the real Dodge City was built on violence and exploitation. Native Americans were killed and displaced. Women were marginalized and abused. The law was corrupt and inconsistent. But Gunsmoke ignored all of that. It created a fantasy version of the West that made white audiences feel good about their history. James said he was complicit in that fantasy. He played the noble lawman who protected civilization from chaos, but he knew that story was a lie. The so-called civilization was built on genocide and theft. James said he wished he had been brave enough to demand more honest storytelling, but he stayed silent because speaking up would have cost him his job. In his final years, James Arness tried to make peace with his complicated legacy. He acknowledged that Gunsmoke entertained millions of people and provided jobs for thousands of cast and crew members over 20 years. He understood that Matt Dillon meant something to viewers who needed to believe in heroes. But James also wanted people to know the cost of creating that icon. He had sacrificed his health and his family and his artistic integrity to play a character he never fully believed in. James said his biggest regret was not walking away sooner. He should have quit after 10 years when he still had his health and his marriage. But he was afraid. He did not know who he was without Matt Dillon. The character had consumed his identity so completely that James could not imagine life without him. When Gunsmoke ended, James tried to distance himself from Matt Dillon by taking different roles. He did television movies and miniseries where he played villains and complicated characters. But audiences rejected those performances. They wanted Matt Dillon and nothing else. James said that rejection was devastating. He had spent 20 years building a character that brought him fame, but destroyed his ability to do anything else. James was typecast for the rest of his career. Every role he played was compared to Matt Dillon and found lacking. James admitted he grew to resent Matt Dillon and everything the character represented, but he also knew he could never escape. Matt Dillon was his greatest achievement and his biggest prison. James Arness died in 2011 at the age of 88. In his final interviews, James reflected on what Gunsmoke had meant and what it had cost. He said if he could do it all over again, he would have said no when CBS first approached him. He would have stayed in films even if it meant smaller roles and less money. He would have chosen artistic freedom over fame. But James also acknowledged that regret was pointless. He had made his choices and he had to live with the consequences. What James wanted people to understand is that Matt Dillon was not real. The noble lawman who always did the right thing was a fantasy created by writers who had never experienced real violence or moral complexity. Behind that fantasy was an actor who felt trapped and diminished by his own success. James said the real story of Gunsmoke is not about heroism or justice. It is about the cost of creating myths that audiences desperately want to believe. It is about an actor who gave 20 years of his life to a character that destroyed almost everything that mattered to him. James Arness sacrificed his body and his family and his sense of self to be Matt Dillon. And in the end, he was left with nothing but pain and regret, and the knowledge that it had all been for a lie. That is what James Arness finally revealed about Gunsmoke, the truth that nobody wanted to hear, the hidden cost of being an American hero.